Well, again, thank you to everybody that's joined us today for our webinar. The topic is on strategies and resources for succession planning. And it is actually brought to you by several organizations, and we'll be talking about those in just a moment. But I do want to introduce our presenters, Maria Marshall, who is Professor and Director of the Purdue Institute for Family Business, and Renee Wyatt, who is Family Business Management Specialist, also at Purdue University. I'm the manager of the Agrability Project here at Purdue University, but it is only one of several organizations that are presenting the webinar today. I do want to give you a quick overview of Agrability before we talk about some of the other organizations. Agrability is sponsored by the USDA, and we focus on assisting people in agriculture that have some type of disability or functional limitation. We also have a special focus on outreach to underserved populations. Every Agrability project is a partnership between a land-grant university and at least one nonprofit disability services organization, and there are currently 20 Agrability state projects around the country. The National Agrability Project is led by Purdue University's Breaking New Ground Resource Center, and our partners on that grant include Goodwill of the Finger Lakes, April, which is the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living, Colorado State University, and Washington State University. If you have any more questions or like more information about Agrability, feel free to visit agrability.org. You'll find over 90 other archived webinars on that site if you'd like to check those out. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Tamika Peoples. She is the founder and also the CEO of Peoples Foundation and is the principal investigator on the Life Project grant, which is a sponsor of this webinar. So Tamika, if you'd like to unmute yourself and activate your camera, I will mute and turn my camera off.
Okay. Getting a bit of a buffering. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. As Paul mentioned, Tamika Peoples, founder of Peoples Foundation. We're a California-based veteran nonprofit organization. We're just one of the 3 organizations who work together to put this part series together. We do that work under the Life Project and the 2501 sponsored program through USDA. Our work centers around outreach to veteran, new, beginning, and socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, and through those workshops, which are provided in the areas of master gardening training, aquaponics, seed-to-store methodologies, and farming to overcome limitations, just like our National Agrability Partner provides. While providing these resources, we also highlight to those farmers how they can tap into USDA programs and resources in order to support their farming and ranching needs. Oh, sorry, excuse me, wrong way. As I mentioned, this is part 2 in a 3-part series. And in the first part series, we focused on really overviewing the historical issues with succession planning for African American farmers and ranchers, and really addressing some of the succession planning is a critical need in how farmland and ownership is very important, and how to just pass that on to the next generation, and what are those steps. Today's session, we're going to build upon that, and this is just, like I mentioned, the second in our 3rd part series, and we're going to extend that, of course. There are more tools and resources that you can find out about Life Project on thelifeproject.com. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over today to Dr. Marshall and Ms. Wyatt so that they can get started with their presentation, because these ladies have a lot to cover, and you'll find a lot of useful and insightful tips that they're going to provide you for succession planning. So Paul and team, back over to you. And again, thank you so much for being a part of this webinar series, and we really hope that you find the information useful.
Okay, Dr. Marshall and Renee, we'll turn it over to you for the main section of our presentation.
Okay, thank you. I think Renee's sharing her screen here, so while she does it, I can talk. So thank you for having us be part of this 3-part series. So Renee and I are both part of the Purdue Institute for Family Business, and we are both hosted in the Department of Agricultural Economics. If you're wondering why it's not farm, we deal with all types of farm businesses, but of course our competitive advantage in most of the businesses that we deal with, family businesses, are farm businesses. And so we might go back and forth between saying family business and farm family and farm business, but that's just because we use all of those terms interchangeably, since 97 or actually 99% of farms are family farms, by whatever definition you use of a farm or a family business. So I'm Maria Marshall. I'm the director of the Purdue Institute for Family Business and a professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics. Renee?
And I'm Renee White. I'm the Family Business Management Specialist for the Purdue Institute for Family Business, and Maria and I are also integral parts of the Purdue Extension Succession Planning team. So we work a lot with educators around the state to host programming and put out resources for farms and family businesses with succession-related issues. So we want to start out, if you only get two things out of this presentation today, we want to really stress the importance of communicating often and planning early in order to get the succession planning thing rolling. We have families and farms who come to us a lot and they just don't know where to start. And a lot of times that huge part that they just need to do is just to start planning and to start communicating. So we want to really stress those two things to you today. We're going to start with a little bit of background and some statistics into family businesses. So we did a survey in 2012. It was Midwestern businesses, farm and non-farm family businesses. And we just want to give you some examples to kind of motivate you and try to make you feel like you're not alone if you haven't started the succession planning process yet. Some of these statistics are really interesting.
So one of the first things you'll notice is we ask goals. So we'll talk a lot about goals and establishing goals, and that's part of the communication process of succession planning. And I know that a lot of you might be on the call saying, I want to know what legal structure I need to have. Well, usually we want to start off before that actually talking about, is everybody even on the same page? Now, there are a lot of people that say that all businesses are profit maximizing, right? They're looking out for just making, maybe profit. But family businesses are unique in that they have a lot of social emotional wealth, which is basically these non-financial goals that they're really shooting forward, such as having a good reputation with customers, transgenerational transfer. So exactly what you're interested in today, succession planning and keeping that family in the business. So keeping control within the family. And those are all non-financial goals. And so you see when we interviewed farm family businesses in the Midwest, most of them said that, yes, it's these non-financial goals that were important to them. Go ahead to the next one. And so if you're sitting here saying, well, I haven't identified my successor yet, you are not alone. So 72% of our respondents have not yet identified a successor or successors. And this basically, so our surveys in the Midwest, but this basically concurs with national data that says that most family businesses or most farm businesses have not yet identified a successor.
So when we asked family businesses, how do you expect your business to be distributed to the next generation, over 70% of them said that it's going to pass in some way or another. So the business will carry on versus being liquidated. So there are three main options, and we'll get into those a little bit later, but over half of our respondents said that they were going to sell or give the business to someone in the family, and then 15% said they're going to sell the business to someone outside of the family. But in both of those situations, you need to have a business entity at the end to pass on if that expectation is going to be met.
And what's interesting about that, you'll see that 27% have said that their assets would be liquidated. Basically, they had no successor. They thought that nobody was going to pass on. So we asked also, so what do you expect and then what do you want to happen to your business? Well, of the 27% that it's going to be liquidated, only 30% of those actually wanted that to happen. They actually wanted to be able to pass it on to a family business, but they didn't expect that that was going to happen. Sorry, Renee, I made you go back. And so when, you know, I think a question that had been asked in the previous webinar was about this worry about can my family afford to pass on or to get buy into the farm family business. Well, you're not alone. 38% of the respondents said that they were worried about whether their heirs could afford to purchase in the family business. And we'll talk about where in the continuity triangle really estate planning, financial planning falls into that. But you're not alone if you agree that you're worried about whether your heirs can afford to get into the family business.
Another interesting question that we asked was, I plan to transfer the family business to a family successor, even if it puts my own personal wealth and livelihood at increased risk. And over a third said that they agree. So they're willing to put themselves and their own livelihood at risk in order to continue this family business on. And that really speaks to the nature of family business. It's when those family and business systems get intertwined. You know, those decisions that were straightforward before, it's, you know, a business decision, we're profit maximizers, like Maria said in the past, it kind of goes out the window because these family farms and these family businesses want to see that business go on even more than they want their own wealth and livelihood, you know, to be sustained.
So you might be asking, well, how far along were these people in the trans or the succession process? You'll see here we asked them how long they were in their management process, their ownership process, and their estate planning. So a lot of times there's a bit of confusion between whether estate planning is actually a succession process. It's part of the process, but that's not the only thing. So as you would expect, a lot of people have more wills than they have management plans and ownership plans. Those are not the same thing. So when you're thinking about succession, there's actually a process of passing on management to your successor. So if you're the older generation, instead of saying older, as I'm getting older, I'll call you the incumbent generation. And then the younger, we can still call them the successor. And so the incumbent that they're going through, right, there's a lot of people that haven't started yet, but there's a will in place. There's kind of, this is what I want to happen to my assets. Well, a farm isn't necessarily just an asset, it's actually a business. So something to think about is, do I want my farm business to be transferred on to my successors as a whole business, or just assets? Am I just giving them the land and then they can decide what to do, or farm or not farm? And so those are actually two very different things to think about, and how you would strategically have the farm and pass it on. So thinking about where you are in the process is important. And as you see, we divided between management, ownership, and then having an estate plan.
So after you've seen some statistics, I hope that you feel like other farms and other families, you kind of can commiserate with them and say, okay, I'm not alone in this. You know, if you haven't started, that's okay. We're going to really give you some strategies and resources to help your family business and your farm kind of progress through that succession plan and have some plans in place. So first off, we're going to start by talking about how your farm or family business can be successful. So a huge stumbling block for family business is not having a plan, not having that management succession plan in place. We talk to farms and family businesses and they say, well, I have a will. You say, okay, so we know, like Maria said, we know where the land's going to go, but is the business going to blow up because your kids can't get along? You know, there's things that you have to do in order to get that management succession plan in place. So kind of like our statistics said earlier, 80% of business founders want to pass their company on to their children, but 54% don't have a management succession plan. So there's a disparity here. You know, they want to pass this business on, but if they don't have a plan in place, it's really hard to make that happen.
And we've also seen that of those that make it to the second generation, only 13% of those make it to the third. So a lot of times you have this more complicated setup. It might be passed owner-manager to owner-manager, or owner, the incumbent to two siblings. You have a sibling partnership. And then that third generation is what we would call a cousin consortium, or the siblings and their children. And so it starts to get more complicated the more generations come into the business. I always say, you know, more people, more problems. And so something to think about is it just needs more management and more communication as the generations go on. And so you do need to start formalizing more plans as you're going along. So what makes a family business successful? Well, obviously keeping a strong and healthy family that can business that can last into the next generation, but also having and continuing a healthy family into the next generation. So it is called a family business, and if you have a farm, it's a family business. Both of those components are really important to have a healthy business that can actually go and strategically be handed over to another generation, but also a healthy family context. And we'll talk about some of the research we have to really figure out whether your family is highly functioning or highly dysfunctional, but or like most, moderately functional. And so one of the things is that that family component of the family business really needs to have good communication for it to actually get to that second and third generation, which is where we really start to see the breakdown of that healthy family complex. So past research has shown, and many people write, that there are 5 reasons why, the 5 things that successful business family businesses have. The first is shared values. So one of the things that makes a family business unique is a shared culture and a shared values that the family has that they bring forth into the family business. And a lot of times that actually serves as a part of a competitive advantage that family business has when they're looking. So it could be anything from the culture and the history and the tradition that you can actually wrap products around, or the way your farm operates, that you deal with customers and suppliers. And that's really important. So it's those shared values that makes you unique and that family businesses have. It's people being on the same page. It's also a sense of shared power. Now, that doesn't mean, part of being a family business is you have a parent and a grandparent and children, but at some point there has to be this kind of shared power along the generations. And again, that's where that communication and boundaries kind of has to happen, is that there's a sense of shared power in a family business that you might not have in a non-family business.
So another thing that successful family business have is tradition. And when we say tradition, it can be really strong in farms, especially going back generations. You know, we have legacy farms and all kinds of things like that. But when we talk about tradition, we want to make sure that we really anchor on to those traditions that make the business and the family healthy going forward, and the traditions that keep the business progressing and productive and everything like that. You know, we want to be mindful of traditions, but also not have old traditions that are maybe hindering the business carry forward. Another thing is a willingness to learn and grow. And when we talk about this willingness to learn and grow, we're not just talking about the successor. We're talking about the incumbent generation and the successor generation. Both need to be willing to learn, grow, learn about each other, adapt practices, especially for the incumbent generation. We see that as being an issue sometimes. You know, we hear, well, this is the way it's always done, or this is the way grandpa did it, this is the way grandma did it. We want to make sure that we have a willingness to learn and grow as the business needs to progress. And also strong family ties. In these family businesses, the family is the heart of the business, and those strong family ties will translate into having a strong family business.
So one of the things that, again, makes family business unique is that pouring of family values into the business. So that deep sense of history and heritage, and how we operationalize that really becomes important in terms of how the family values that we have, and communicating those values as you grow, as the business grows and the family grows, and being effective. So a lot of times we concentrate on being able to pass those traditions, and we don't figure out how those traditions are actually passed on into the business. And so those family traditions and that culture is passed on to the business in the way that we interact with customers, interact with suppliers, and interact with succeeding generations.
So what we really want to do is to translate, operationalize, and express these family values into the business. And so that's a lot to say, but we have an example to kind of show you how this can be done. So your family may value integrity, say. So family members can express that value of integrity to business members. So employees, people working in the business, family that's in the business, and then business leadership can empower employees to translate that integrity value to their customers. They can do this by treating their customers and coworkers with respect, by being courteous, being fair in business, not doing any slime deals, things like that. And then, ultimately, the business can operationalize integrity in their business all the way from the family, all the way through the line into their business. So that's what we're talking about when we're saying, to operationalize and express these family values in the business.
So something else that a family business needs to do is think about how the family perceives the farm. So do they perceive the farm as a glue that holds the family together, or is it a threat to the family? So where you have a lot of great communication, there's a lot of history and tradition, you might think of the farm, that's what holds the family together. It's this love of the land, love of the farm. It's what keeps everybody coming back and together. An example of business as a threat to the family is when you get into these succession processes. Before, what had been holding the family together is now a threat. And what you see is instead of passing on to two siblings 100 acres or whatever that would be, now you separate the family business into two 50-acre plots because the siblings can't get along. So then it becomes a threat to the family, or they don't talk, or it passes on, but people don't talk. One of the questions that we asked in our survey is, okay, you got the farm. Did you consider the succession process a good one? And 20 to 30% of our respondents said, yeah, I got the farm, but no, I don't consider the succession process to have been successful. I'm not talking to my cousin, or I'm not talking to my brother. That would be the farm as a threat to the family. The other one is thinking about equal empowerment. That was one of the things that we said was part of the success of a family business, or a single leader. So a lot of times what you'll see is a family business or family farm is really centered around a matriarch or a patriarch. They're the ones that make the decisions. They're the ones that were leading forward and making everybody come, right? The reunions and things like that. So that's that kind of single leader empowerment. That's the person who has the power versus an equal empowerment where everybody's getting together to make policies and decisions to the best of their ability. So thinking of the family's perception of the business as, is it equal empowerment? How do people vote to make decisions? Where does the buck stop? Or is it a single leader?
And another continuum we can really think about is the family first to business first continuum. So family first to farm first, we can say. And so in some farms, you can see where the family comes first. If there's, say, Sally has a ball game, they miss harvest or something to go to that ball game. Whereas you can see in a business first continuum where they're on the far side of putting the farm before everything else, where those ball games and that family time might be missed. And so there's a balance in all of these, and there's really no right answer as to where you fall, but it's just a good thing to keep in mind different perceptions that you can have on these different continuums within your business. And it can really change how you make decisions, and just the dynamics of your family and farm business can be affected by where you fall on these continuums.
And sometimes these might look like very kumbaya types of issues, right? Oh, you're talking about communication and sharing power, but they actually have a real life effect on the way that you manage your business and how you manage the succession process. So your family beliefs, culture, traditions, goals affect the family vision and how you envision that the business and the farm moving forward, which actually affects the form of ownership that you would have. Right? So it's going to affect, is it an LLC? Is it a sole proprietor? What types of governance are we going to have for our family farm moving forward, which actually then affects your business strategy, the strategy that you put in place to be able to make that a reality. So these things are on this continuum, and you do have to start with what do we envision, and that actually leads you to your strategy. And a lot of times what we see is people want to start right on the form of ownership, as if an LLC will suddenly tell you exactly what to do. No, that's just a legal form of ownership. It actually doesn't dictate how you have the strategy for your business or the vision of your family business. So you want to start right with the vision and then move on to forms of ownership and then business strategy. So if you go to our website, which we'll send you to later, what you'll see a lot is what we call the pie. Well, our pie is actually based on this continuity planning triangle, which is thinking about the estate and personal finance which of course you have to have. We talked about estate planning. And then the business strategy, leadership and ownership succession. And in the middle is this family continuity. Remember, one of the things that you need to have a successful family farm and a family business is actually a good continuity plan, a good communication within the family. And if you don't have good estate and personal finance, it's hard to do a business strategy, hard to do the succession process. And it's hard to do the succession process if you don't have good leadership, or you haven't thought about professional development, or how you're dealing with the successor. And so it all ties together in kind of what we call it the pie. In other places they call it the continuity planning triangle, where you have to think about all of these things together in conjunction to actually have a good succession plan.
Now that we've kind of discussed some parts that go into our family farm businesses, we're going to talk a little bit about what aids in the succession process. So we want to get this process moving forward. So what are some things that help there? So a strong foundation in both the family and the business. This can be started by discussing goals. It's often hard to just be out in the shop or be out in the combine or something and say, hey, what are your goals? So if you want to start this discussion, it's good to have farm meetings where you have an agenda, everybody's going to be there. They don't happen on a holiday. We don't want people fighting over Thanksgiving dinner or anything like that. So we want you to start by just discussing goals and of everybody. So let all the generations speak. Let everyone, talk about where they see the farm going, what things would they like to do. You can learn a lot about your family members and people that you're in business with just by sitting down and seeing where they want that business to go. Of course, you need to identify a successor. Like we mentioned, 70% of farms had not identified a successor. Well, no wonder they don't make it to the next generation, right? You have to have that successor picked out. And then educate the owner on where to start the transfer process. A lot of times they think, oh, well, we'll just go meet with an attorney and it'll be done. But if you don't have the correct management plan in place and have good communication within your family, that plan might not go the way you want it to. And all, like I said before, the family business needs to focus on communication. So the statistic that Maria was referring to earlier, only 44% of succession transfers that had been completed were deemed as successful. That's not a very high percentage that says they're successful. Like she said, you may have the business, but you don't talk to your brother anymore. So these are things that we can keep in mind when we're talking about the succession planning process.
And the important part is that, again, you start with clarifying goals, and usually people want to start in the structuring, tax, and legal setup. That's a lot of questions we have. But you can't really do that until you've actually thought of these other 5 pieces: the clarifying goals, reviewing the strategy that you're going to do to get there, planning the transition of responsibility. So the plan, it can sometimes be kind of like, oh, it's just like a business plan. It's kind of it is a roadmap of transition of responsibilities. Thinking about what the value of the firm is going to be. That's also part of the process. And then find how that succession is going to be financed, and then structuring the tax and legal setup. So there are steps that get there. A lot of us just want to start in sections, 5 and 6, instead of thinking of all the ones that have to precede it.
And if they do start at the end, they have this legal setup and they have their tax structure and everything. If the goals don't line up with the end, then the plan is basically useless, and they've wasted all this time and money with their attorney and their financial advisor and things like that. So yeah, it is very important, like Maria said, to start at the beginning and start by clarifying those goals and priorities. So just to reiterate, we've discussed this a little bit before, but the 3 main succession options that when we surveyed businesses, they said that business assets will be liquidated in about 27% of farms. About 15% will be transferred to someone outside of the business, outside of the family, excuse me. And business will be sold or given to family successors in about 58% of that time. So again, over 70% of these farms want it to be transferred to someone, whether it's inside or outside of the family.
So usually management and ownership are passed along in sequential steps. A lot of times what we'll see is that management is transferred first, and then ownership starts getting to be transferred at a later date. And we'll talk about why it's important to think about starting this discussion. It actually takes time to do a succession process. It is not a 1 day, a 1 month, or 1 year process. So past research has shown that if you're just going to sell your business, your farm, it's going to take 1.6 years to actually go through that sales process. It could. To transfer to employees, it could be 3.3 years, and an intra-family succession usually takes about 6 years to almost 10 years to go through that process. So why does intra-family succession take longer? Well, because we pass on management first, right? We're bringing the successor generation, and they're working with us together on the farm, and then we're slowly passing on ownership. They might be buying in slowly, we might be financing slowly, or they may never get to be owners until the incumbent generation just decides to really retire or pass away. So that's why that it can take so long. Part of that process is that the successor generation can become quite resentful when a lot of management is being passed and equity is being built, but that successor generation does not have any final say, for example, because they're not the owners process. So you want to make sure that you are thinking this is a long-term process that you're going to get into. It's not going to be done in a year. The plan may be done in a year, but the actual process is going to take several years to happen. And sorry about my dogs, if you can hear them.
Maria, we've seen a lot of families come in and talk to us, and we have the successor generation that's maybe 55 or 60 years old, wondering when they actually get to take over the management. So that's not uncommon, where we see that happening, especially in farming.
So what are some of the steps that you want to go through as you are dealing with your management succession process? Obviously, selecting a successor or successors, whether they're in the family or outside of the family. Creating a survival toolkit for the successors, so starting a kind of that professional development process of grooming the successor, and promoting an environment of trust and respect. So a lot of times, if it's an intra-family succession, you want to make sure that the incumbent realizes that they're bringing in a partner, not just their child or their nephew or niece. It is another adult partner, and they need to be treated as a partner. So sometimes those boundaries can be blurry and blurred in that process. So really having an environment of trust and respect mutually is really important. And then, of course, coping with the financial realities of estate and financial taxes, of the legal implications of having to finance the succession process in and of itself.
So now that we've talked about some strategies for succession planning, we're going to go into some of the resources that you can use to help your family business, your family farm, kind of progress through those steps.
I'm sorry about this. My dogs have never barked like this before. I don't know if you can hear them or not. So one of the resources that we talked about farm functionality is we have a tool on our website that's called we call it the FB Brag, and it's really balance, resolve, adaptability, and growth. And it's thinking about it's just a 4-item scale or questions where both generations can sit down, or as many members of the family and the family business can sit down and actually do these and discuss where they may see some issues in communication or things that might happen for the business. So it's a really good tool to start the conversation going on what are some things that we can do better in the communication within our family business.
Another resource that we want to mention is Code Red, and it's contingency planning for your family and farm operation. So basically, this is a spreadsheet that you can download from the Women in Ag website, and I will tell you a little bit more about it. So there's 2 main sections. There's the farm business section, and there's the personal section. So basically, you're able to document everything from your structure, your finances in the farm, social media accounts, the logins, and things like that. Farm inventory. We've heard of cases where, you know, a member of the farm business has to be hospitalized or removed for some reason from the farm for a little bit, and no one knows where the keys to the shed are and things like that. So, I mean, having those things written down in a document that people can share throughout the family is a really good idea. We have the personal section as well, which has, you know, personal information, social media, non-farm personal inventory, and you can add tabs to this spreadsheet as you see fit. One thing that I do want to note is that you really need to update this, I would say annually maybe. You know, things change more than you think. You know, you look through old accounts and things like that, and things can change within a year. So updating that spreadsheet is a really good idea, and keeping different copies at different locations. But it's a really good place to store that farm and business and family information for you.
So one of the most helpful resources that we can provide you is what we would call the succession roadmap, which really helps you set goals and tracking your progress through the succession process. And this is something I teach a family business class, which is all farm kids that want to go back into the family farm. And this is maybe the homework assignment that gets them the most progress in talking to their incumbents about when they're going to take over the farm. And many have decided to work to get a few years of experience outside of the farm when they realize that they might not be an owner for 20 years. Somehow they think they're going to come out of college and suddenly become an owner, and the birds are like, I'm only 45. I think it's going to take a while for you to become it. So we think it's one of the most important things that you can actually discuss between the generations. So here is an example of the roadmap. So we actually start with the age of the incumbent and the successor and the year that you can start. So it might be that you say, okay, when you are 35 and I'm 65, or when I'm 65 or 55 and I'm ready to retire, and that's where the T1 year is, and where the T year starts. And then you start, this is how long it's going to take us to actually transfer the management and ownership and functional responsibilities. So as you can see, you've got the incumbents, and the example that you have has, that we gave you in your handout actually has for you can have 2 successors, but you can have as many as you like. And we start here with governance transition. So thinking about the ownership percentage that might be transferred, when and how. So for example, one of my students, when they were doing this, as part of realized that they would only get the last 10% or 20% of the farm where the grandpa passed away, right? So he said, well, they might be T whenever for that last portion. And we have board management because it depends on the type of legal ownership that you have for your business, whether you might have, if you have an LLC or you have an S Corp or a C Corp, you actually have a board. You only have to have a board, and so there might be some board management that has to transfer as well, and when that's going to happen. And then you get to the transition of functional responsibilities. And a lot of times this is where, besides ownership, this is where you really get into that nitty-gritty of management and when that's going to get transferred. As you can see, we have here human resources, business strategy, marketing, but you have to think about what works for you in terms of the functional responsibilities of the farm and the management of the farm, and when and who is going to do both things. So you see here in the first example, in the first year, Peter's doing everything still. And then on the T+1, Ruth is starting to take more responsibility, and both of them are doing things. And as time goes on, then Ruth at T+6 is starting to has all of those responsibilities. And then any miscellaneous transition items that you might have in their roadmap. So what's interesting and important about that is that it really gives the incumbent okay, this is really when I'm going to start. I'm really ready, and these are the things to transition, and gives you a timeline. And for the successor, it really gives them this like, yeah, this is going to happen, and this is when it's going to happen. I'm not working forever and never going to get ownership or never going to have full management. These are when years are going to happen. Of course, it can be modified, but it really, if you sit down and really think through this, it really gives both the incumbent and the successor it gets away from this uncertainty of when do things need to happen and the milestones that may need to happen. So it could be that Ruth, for example, as the successor, doesn't become doesn't do human resource strategies or things like that until she has this other professional development. Or she refuses to take over finances until the farm kind of gets more professional the way they do accounting, right? So there could be milestones on both ends. Not only that the successor needs to do some things, but the incumbent also needs to do things, or the farm needs to do something. So it could be that the farm also has a real estate business attached to it, but it's something that Ruth has no interest in. She doesn't want to be a landlord. And she says, you know, I'm happy to take over the farm business, but it must be separate from these real estate or homes that you own and that you're a landlord for. Right? So those are milestones that might need to happen for that to move forward.
And so in the handout that you all received before attending this webinar, we have this blank roadmap. And like Maria said, we have the 1 successor example, 2 successor examples, but you can go up to N, however many successors you want to have. And yeah, you can fill this out and really make it your own. But yeah, having those milestones really makes people move, and it makes action happen. And a lot of times, like Maria said, if we don't have these goals, then we just kind of sit stagnant until something happens to us. But we want to really be proactive in this planning process and make things go forward, make sure that we get to where we want to be. So the last resource, of course, is the Purdue Institute for Family Business website, and this is the beautiful pie that Maria talked about earlier, having those 4 main business areas that we like to focus on. Maria, do you want to say a little bit more about the website?
Sure. So as I said, we've got resources on estate and personal financial planning. We've got leadership and succession planning resources. Under strategic and business planning, if you haven't written a business plan or updated in a long time, we actually have a free business planner where you can just, I call it the TurboTax of business planning, because just like TurboTax, it asks you questions and you can write right into the business planner, and then it gives you where these different sections need to be on the business plan, including financial statements as well. So if you haven't done that in a while, it might be a good exercise to have it, and it's completely free. So those are the types of things that are in the website. And then, of course, one of the most important parts is maintaining family bonds. In the triangle, you saw it as a family continuity. So this is what we translated to maintaining family bonds. If you don't maintain family bonds, everything kind of just starts to fall apart for the family business.
Awesome. And then if you want to contact either Maria or myself, or if you just want to email the Institute, you can do that at pifb@purdue.edu. Or, of course, you can look up our email addresses. We're not hard to find. In conclusion, we want to make sure that people know it takes time, patience, and preparation to locate a suitable successor, to strike a deal, and to make the transition. But the keys to all of this are communication and planning.
And it might seem weird that we said strike a deal versus have a plan. But even if it's an intra-family succession, you are striking a deal between generations within the business and within the family to move this forward. So think of it as a deal that you're striking with other family members to make this go forward successfully. And with that, thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Maria and Renee, for that excellent presentation and for an excellent presentation style. I'm guessing you guys have probably done those presentations before, because you certainly have it down pat. So we will be taking questions. If you have questions, you can enter those into the chat area, please. Before we
Okay. We've had a couple questions come in right there at the end there, so it took me a minute to catch back up. Maria and Renee, we'll kind of go through these. I'll kind of sort through, try to get, okay. Here's what if you don't have a family member who will take over the farm, but you want it to remain as a farm? I think that happens pretty commonly.
Yes, pretty commonly. So one resource that you should look into is there might be a farm link, either a farm link organization or a farm link process. It might be through your maybe a State Department of Ag, or it's a non-for-profit. But there are several states that have farm link programs. Another way that you can think of looking for a non-family successor for a farm is to go to look for beginning farmer rancher programs, because a lot of those beginning farmer rancher grants and programs are all about linking young farmers, beginning farmers with retiring farmers because they want to farm. So looking for programs, and also thinking that it might not have to be somebody that is right in your state, that somebody might be willing to move to farm. It's just that, you know, that process may take longer, and you might have a lot of starts and stops in that process. But thinking about looking at those two resources would be a great way to start if you want it to be a farm and continue to farm. And some states actually have credits that they offer to farmers that do go to non-family successors to keep it a farm. So thinking about those resources more would be a place to start.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to a couple more. We've got a question. I have 2 parcels with 1 deed. I'd like to know how to go about separating the 2 parcels into 2 deeds. And if that's, you know, that may be a little more specific than you want to get into at this point, but if you want to give it a shot, great.
I would say we're not lawyers, and that's probably more a lawyer question. So I would take that to a lawyer, and that's something that, as ag economists, even as much as we do with farm succession, that we'll probably be able to answer. We might get in trouble. It'll be more trouble than actually helpful.
Fair enough. Well, that kind of follows up. Paul had a question that he'd put in, how important is it to consult with a lawyer in the succession process, and when do you do it?
Yeah, so it's very important to include a lawyer in your plans to make sure you have everything covered. You want to make sure all of your assets are included, everyone that is part of the succession plan is included, but at the same time, we don't want to go to a lawyer just to let you tell stories, I guess. We have a lot of, we've had a lot of farms, you know, where they spend a lot of money at lawyers and maybe don't get as far as they want to be when they're there. So start those discussions at home, get those goals clarified at home with your family and with the people in your farm. Make sure people at least you know the direction that people want to go, because you don't want to be paying to sit in a lawyer's office and discuss those things that could be otherwise discussed at home.
Okay. Well, I'll follow that one up then. We have another question. How do conversations happen with in-laws? Should the initial discussions happen with the immediate family, parents and children? There's another question kind of along that line too. So how do those conversations get started? Even sometimes it's not an easy one to broach.
So I know that a lot of issues that happen is because the incumbent generation does not want to start that conversation, because it is a kind of looking at your own mortality in some way. And if you think about retiring in something that you've done for a long time, it's part of your identity and who you are and what you've done for a long time. And so those are difficult conversations. It's a little bit of a grieving process in some way for the incumbent generation in some ways. Right, so I always suggest thinking about or starting the conversation is like, how do you envision this farm moving forward? And I mean, right, that's a pretty broad, pretty like, hey, when are you going to give me the farm? Right? And so if it's, I envision, I really want you to take over. Well, I thought we're working together, aren't we? And so that's how you can start the conversation. Like, okay, well then, how can we move forward to make this a little bit more, more organized, less stressful, less uncertain? Because a lot of times that successor generation has a lot of uncertainty about when things are happening. And kind of using that roadmap, which is pretty simple, can start that process too, because it's not like saying, so how long is it going to, you can sit down and little by little think about it. And I think I saw somebody along the lines also that if you only have one successor, do you need a succession plan? Yes, you do. It doesn't matter if it's 1 or 2. It can be a complicated process, and it can take long. And you might find the stumbling block in between there. You can't assume because it's your child that they want to do everything the same way, right? And so that's where those things need to kind of switch up.
Okay. Another one, my son is to be successor of a farm near us. Should the children of the farmer who do not want the farm be involved in the successor planning?
They need to at least be informed of what's going on so they're not shocked with something. So you don't, there's probably a backstory there that we don't have, right? But you want to make sure, we always say overly communicate versus not, because a lot of times the incumbent generation may not always put forth why they're doing something the way they're doing it. And it's a lot easier for everyone, both family who's part of the business and family who's not included in the business, to understand when those things happen, if it has been discussed and intentions were expressed and things like that. So that's kind of a loaded question, but they should at least be informed.
And our question on the in-laws is like, even if you're not involved in your in-laws are involved. So it is for families trying to decide whether that family business is only by blood or is it with everybody that's in the family, because those kinship ties, people can come in and out of families. And so, yeah, that is a discussion in and of itself, is who is involved in discussions of the family.
Very good. I think we're about on time here. Where do we? Okay. If people want more information, there are more opportunities for training in this area, and we have a nationwide audience. So, you know, where do people go to get for more information? I know we've mentioned the Purdue Institute for Family Business, and where do we go for more information?
Well, you have the Institute website. Every state's extension usually has some type of succession planning process, workshops that are going on. So your extension offices are probably a good way to start, particularly on the visioning, goal planning, thinking about succession before you go to a lawyer, what questions to ask a lawyer. All of those things you'll find in almost every land grant, 1890 institution will have some type of process. And Renee and I are about to tape a whole bunch of videos on family business and management. And so you can come back to our YouTube channel and then see a whole bunch of videos with more resources as well.
And I will say the succession planning team at Purdue, one of our past grants, we had some money to record some estate planning videos with an attorney. And so those are actually hosted on the PIFB YouTube channel. So if you want to check those out, those are archived there as well. So some of those lawyer attorney questions that Maria and I can't really get into, we do have some information on our YouTube channel about those. And yeah, keep an eye out for if you follow us on social media, or you can subscribe to get our monthly updates. We'll blast out those videos as they come out and as they
Can I add here?
Go ahead, Tamika.
Yeah, just a quick verb here. I do know that for the third session, we are tentatively talking about having a lawyer a part of that presentation, because we do realize that there are some more kind of rounded questions that are focused on that piece. But, you know, when you start to get into attorney-client privilege and those things, so it'll be top level, but definitely centered on areas that we should focus on from a legal perspective in the succession planning realm. So we are talking about that, and as that develops and rounds out, we'll definitely be alerting everyone with regard to that for the third wrap-up of this series. So just FYI on that.
One more quick one. We had a question if the slides were going to be available.
Yep, we'll get those sent out.
Okay, very good. Paul, turn it over back over to you.
Thanks again to everybody that's joined us today and to our presenters. We will keep you up to date in terms of when that final webinar in this series will take place. So we appreciate your attendance today, and we wish you a good rest of the day.